for today's event.
Thanks very much. Lucy kindly described this as a poem. It's more an act of grand larceny from various Celtic myths and folklore. I also need to apologise for my Gaelic pronunciation and some very dodgy astronomy. The poem's about a walk that many of you will know, and if you don't know this walk, you can actually take it afterwards. So it's a very practical poem. Here it is. Joe Doolan's Walk. Joe's old boots sank deep in Fife mud. Stones slid from the path into the Maspie Burn's wild rush. Rain fell through the oaks and cedars into the brown tangle of his hair. He didn't care. He needed this steep, soaking walk up the glen to free his head and think. Something wasn't right. Something was missing from the plan. But what? They'd studied the drone pics, tested the soil, counted every bug, bird, tree, leaf. They'd considered and consulted. Even so, some nagging, hard to put your finger on aspect of the plan was wrong. Just wrong. Joe trudged on until he glimpsed the Yad at last, that gleaming sandstone wall where the Maspie Burn runs out of earth and falls 30 feet or more into a foaming pool. And anyone can track the path into a shadowy nook of rock and look through the plummeting water into a blur of trees. But then Joe saw the girl, well, woman really, leaning from the cave's stony lip into the Yad's shimmering fall. He rubbed his eyes, decided he was seeing things, dreaming. But then the woman lifted her head, smiled, raised a pale hand and waved him on. Trainers, torn blue jeans, some kind of green flowery t-shirt, drenched dark from her drenched hair. Her eyes were also green, somewhere between honey and oak leaf. Joe guessed this was maybe some hippie chick come to find herself in nature and think she knew it all and get it wrong, more Morningside than child of the glens. But when she spoke, her voice was slow and echoey. "Who be you?" she said. And right away, our man replied, "I be Joe Doolan, convener of the Falkland Multifunctional Land Use Forum." And then the woman said, "And who be your god or goddess? What be your holy thing?" Joe swallowed hard. Clearly the woman was mad, touched, his man would say. He spoke above the water's roar. "We represent the voices of farmers, gardeners, schools, businesses, various voluntary and conservation groups to plan how the land may be designed for multiple outputs of value and use. Sustainable timber, carbon sequestering marshlands, no-dig tatty fields, beehives and cycle tracks." The woman's green eyes shone. "And what about all the useless things? What about the cascade of light through a mayfly's wing? What about the taste of snow on a roebuck's tongue? Who'll speak up for them?" Joe said nothing. The question made no sense. He had to get a grip of things, so he took a breath and asked, all nice and reasonable, "Are you staying at the campsite by the organic cafe? They've maps for local walks and nature guides." No answer. Instead, this dripping hippie lass did a bold and lovely thing. She put a hand on Joe's arm and in the deepest, loudest whisper he had ever heard said, "I am dawn girl and wood witch and bog queen. I am the wind that blows from the deep cold sea." And then she stepped onto the very edge of the thinnest ledge of stone and spread her arms and danced and cried, "I am the Cailleach. I am the deer of your heart. I am the bright stag and the moonlit midnight hind. I am the pearl in the well at the end of the world. But you can call me love. And then she laughed and leapt into the plummeting stream. Joe threw himself toward her. Maybe he could catch a reaching hand, but there was no telling the falling woman from the falling water. And from the swirl and thrash of the Yad pool, no blue jean body rose, no voice came, but the old song of the Maspie burn, strong and swift as it had always been. Joe knelt on the soaked rock. He shook and gasped and sobbed and stayed that way till the rainy evening came like a cool veil thrown across the glen. Joe took one last look at the drowning Yad, scrambled to his feet and ran down the slippy path, over the bridge, through the twilight trees, until he came to that great green field where Ninian's chapel stands, roofless under big Fife skies. Joe stumbled in. His head hurt, his bones ached, his soul ached. He lay himself upon the broken chapel floor. Rain fell into his eyes. What on earth was the point of a chapel with no roof? Just another useless thing. And then a memory stirred. His grandpa had brought him here as a lad. They'd peered into the cracks between the stones, found owl pellets, vole bones, moth wings, and Joe had smelt them, touched them, held the stuff of life and death in his trembling 9-year-old hand, while his grandpa explained that the chapel had been built by the old laird in memory of his son, dead at the age of 3 in 1910. Then the Great War broke. The roof never did get put on, but when the men that survived came back from France and Flanders, they liked the chapel that way. They'd loved and lost so many pals and comrades blown to bits. They had no gravestone but the empty sky, no headstone but the moon. Joe wiped the rain from his eyes. All those ruined lives, all that death. Never mind what's the use of the land. For Christ's sake, Joe thought, what's the use of man? But then the mad girl's words came back to him. What about all the useless things? Who'll speak up for them? Joe raised his head and gazed beyond the chapel's useless, roofless walls. The rain had stopped. The clouds were growing thin. No moon, but a lonely shining star. Fianna, heaven's bright stag, gazing down on a Falkland field, searching him out. Know thyself, beloved, on the earth. Joe struggled to his feet and thought of the men back from war wandering the chapel, looking for a moment's peace. And he remembered those bits of life he'd cradled in his hand all those years ago. And Joe knew then that every leaf, pebble, twig, every bird cry in the wood, every gunshot, every hammered nail, every touch, every kiss, everything's a tale. And life's not about the schemes we hatch, but the stories that we tell. Joe took a long, long breath. He still had to think about the land. He still had plans to make, but things were different now. Something had changed, like he was walking in the skin of a beautiful stranger. At last, he whispered, to no one and nothing but a fluttering moth and the entire cosmos. At last, I can begin.